Good morning, everyone. Let's see. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the December 10th meeting for the Legislative Council Subcommittee to implement a racial impact statement process pilot. We'll start with introductions. I'm Rachel Talbot Ross. I represent House District 40, which is part of Portland. And I will hand it off to the speaker, Speaker Fecteau.
Good morning. My name is Ryan Fecteau. I represent my hometown of Biddeford, and I have the pleasure of serving as Speaker of the House.
Senator Daughtry.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Senator Maddie Daughtry. I represent Senate District 24, which are communities of Brunswick, Hartsville, North Yarmouth, Freeport, and Pownell, and I'm also the Assistant Senate Majority Leader.
Thank you, Senator. We will ask staff to introduce themselves.
Good morning. My name is Danielle Fox. I am the Director of the Office of Policy and Legal Analysis.
And good morning. I'm Suzanne Gresser. I'm the Executive Director of the Legislative Council.
Thank you both. I'm going to check in with Director Fox. You had indicated that Senator Pouliot had confirmed. Should we wait for Senator Pouliot, or would you suggest we move forward?
That's really the call of the chair. I don't have a way to reach out to him to see if he's on his way, which might inform your decision. So I really need to probably leave that to you. Maybe Speaker Fecteau is reaching out.
Yeah, I'll send him a text, or Maddie, if you want to.
I haven't heard anything.
Okay.
He had, when we originally set the date, he said he was available, and I have sent multiple notices. So I would have thought I'd heard back if his availability had changed. So maybe he'll just be late.
And was Representative Dillingham not available?
I hadn't heard.
Okay.
Well, if Speaker Fecteau, Senator Daughtry, if you agree, I think we should proceed and hope that Senator Pouliot is able to join us as we move the agenda forward. So you've got the agenda and the accompanying materials. First up is an update on the meetings that we've had with the University of Maine System and the Permanent Commission on the status of racial, indigenous, and tribal populations regarding their role in this pilot. And I will turn it over to Director Fox.
Sure. So at the last meeting of the subcommittee on the 27th, the draft proposal from Dr. Dibble of the Permanent Commission was approved by the subcommittee contingent on some changes. And one of the things that the subcommittee tasked us to do, including the chair, Representative Talbot Ross, was to work with the University of Maine folks and the Permanent Commission to see, one, are they willing and able to do this within their own resources, to get an idea of the capacity. So what could they handle in terms of a pilot based on the parameters and the proposal that you had approved at the October 27th meeting. So that was the first of two meetings that have been held between the last subcommittee meeting and this one. And that first one was a fairly lengthy meeting with lots of discussion about how to make the statements most useful, how to have them be as robust as possible. And there was lots of discussion back and forth about quantity versus quality and all of that sort of thing, data availability. And we expect that in the end, there will probably be a range of statements, some that have a lot of data and a lot of resources, and some that are a little thinner, but they came up with an idea of when there was thinner resources to produce a robust statement, they would talk about if information were available, these were the approaches we would take, these are the things we would evaluate. So at least if that data becomes available or is collected in the future, the approach that would be used was determined. So that was essentially the idea for the first meeting, and it ended with Representative Talbot Ross and the University of Maine and the Permanent Commission folks coming up with some criteria for narrowing down the list of bills that I provided to them. As you recall, the subcommittee decided that carryover bills would be the pool from which you would draw, primarily because they're already drafted and we're on a pretty tight timeline. So they already have language to work with. They probably have the benefit of a public hearing, maybe not in all cases. And there's some information sort of connected to those, either whether it be testimony or the committee's familiarity, what have you. So the Representative Talbot Ross and the two entities came up with a way of narrowing that down, and we did like a Venn diagram So anything that sort of met in the middle of the criteria would have been selected. And it was feasibility, data sources. Then some of the lower tier things that would be considered was, is this addressing a systemic issue that may not be a bill that deals with a racial issue on its face, but may identify things that might point out that these are impacted by systemic issues that affect historically disadvantaged populations more negatively than others. And then I think the other was, if it does deal with an issue that on its face is addressing a racial inequity or an inequity among populations who have been historically disadvantaged. So then those teams went off and they looked at that criteria and they collaborated and they sent back to staff and Representative Talbot Ross a categorized list of those carryover bills. And they basically gave them like a red, yellow, or a green. A red was something they didn't think they could do. A yellow was something that they think they could do something on, not quite so sure, or it might be really time consuming, or maybe not just a good candidate for the type of analysis that they'd be looking at. And then there was green, which they felt like they could do. Even with the green and the yellow, they couldn't do that number. So the capacity, they couldn't do all of the ones that they highlighted. So the team worked on reducing that to a number that they felt that they could manage within the time frame provided. And I failed to note that the subcommittee had amended the parameters, so meaning the things that will govern what's included in a racial impact statement, sort of orally at their last meeting. And we came up with I came up with some language to that, and we discussed that with the groups, and Representative Talbot Ross has a slight addition based on those conversations with the University of Maine folks and the Permanent Commission. And you'll see that when we get down to it, but that was accomplished at the first meeting as well. So by the end of the second meeting, we came up with a list of LDs, and that's in your materials today. You'll note that there's 2 bills that are listed, and I think Representative Talbot Ross was thinking that her proposal might change between when that was sent out and today, given some information she had learned about one of the bills that was in the proposal. So I'll let her speak to that when we get there. And then that brought us to the meeting today. I did work with Representative Talbot Ross to talk about sort of what's left in terms of the subcommittee's decisions, assuming that you move ahead with the amended parameters language and the proposed LDs. And I've suggested some things that and there's some materials in here to talk about sort of rounding things out so the pilot can move forward. So that's the update to where we are today.
Well, I would say, Director Fox, you did an excellent presentation on a lot of work that's taken place between our last meeting and today. So thank you for that. And thank you for the work that you've been doing to help lead this. Any questions, Speaker Facto, Senator Daughtry, on how we got here today, the meetings with UMS and Permit Commission? Yes, Speaker Facto.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Danielle, what maybe if you can remember or not, but what were the categories that they sort of outlined as red, yellow, and green?
So red was one, they didn't think it was a good candidate, meaning there probably isn't anything that would highlight a different impact among populations who have been historically disadvantaged, or they felt that there really isn't data out there. So there were multiple factors that gave it a red. Okay. The yellow was that was somewhere in between the availability of resources to do it. And they also, I think, talked about, they questioned whether or not they thought it was a good candidate, and they wanted more guidance from us. They wanted input from us. And so some of those, when we talked about the yellows, would say, oh, for this one, and it was pretty amazing to me, given the number of bills, how much they knew about each one and their assessment of it. I was rather impressed by that, I have to say. But so sometimes it would be they didn't think there were data sources, or they were unsure that the subcommittee would think it was a good candidate for the pilot. So that was the yellow. And the green, they felt they had a good sense that, one, it would be one the subcommittee would likely support, and 2, they thought they could produce a statement within the parameters that you've all defined.
Great.
Speaker Facto.
I'm sorry.
No, I would only add, just to again give it some visibility, and that is, in thinking about it, my sense is for the University Maine system, they were trying to think of where the in-house capacity already existed. And then as we were debating the green and the yellow bills, they also wanted to make sure that they didn't overload one aspect of their capacity. So within education, we already have EMPRI, which is doing a lot of that data gathering and research. That's easy for them to think about. Okay, we can do something around education because we have that built-in resource. But the second wave of thinking about it was, but we don't want to overload EMPRI. So we have to spread out we looked at the bills in terms of how they could be spread out to the law school or Cutler or wherever that exists, so that their in-house was capable of doing the work, number one, but two, we didn't overload one of those resources with too many bills.
Mm-hmm. That's very helpful. Thank you.
So it was about resource allocation. Any other discussion about, I think we can, Director Fox, move to item number 2, which is to look at the revised amended parameters and then talk about the LDs to be included.
Sure, and these materials are posted on the subcommittee's webpage. So if people are listening and they want to see them themselves, they are available on the committee's webpage, which you can find by going to the legislature's main page, looking for the interim studies along the left-hand side, and people should be able to find that. I can also screen share if you'd find that helpful. Do you like me to screen share? Okay.
Sure.
Are you seeing it?
Yes.
Okay. So I think we've pretty well talked about how we got to this place, but I did want to provide for you the amended language. And just like you would look at a bill, the underlined language is new. But in addition, I italicized something that with the discussion with the University of Maine system and the Permanent Commission and Representative Talbot Ross, she has added this. So the underlined language is the direction that you provided me at your last subcommittee meeting. The italicized language is a little addition to that presented by Representative Talbot Ross. And one of the issues that I think when you looked at the parameters at your last meeting, you wanted to ensure that you got some sort of statement, and you were a little worried that maybe that list of just 5 things didn't provide for options to provide something, that maybe the 5 were too limited. So rather than amend each question to sort of beef it up to provide all the options of things to consider, we put sort of like a preamble to the parameters that would say, for the purposes of the pilot to implement a racial impact statement, the analysis conducted for the selected legislation should address the 5 questions below, and when feasible, because we know that there may be cases where that isn't, conclude whether the proposed policy or proposed change to existing policy reduces inequities for historically disadvantaged racial populations, has a neutral impact on inequities among them, or exacerbates inequities among them. And then when a conclusion is not feasible, the statement should describe the limitations or barriers which impeded concluding an impact, which was, I think, something you had asked me to include so that we could identify where maybe we could require data collection in the future. So it might inform future racial impact statements. And then Representative Talbot Ross also, based on the discussions with the team, added, and whether relevant regional or national trends exist, which may provide helpful information. So if Maine doesn't have the data about this issue, but other states have examined it within their state, it might be something that was sort of congruent, or you could say, all right, well, that's a similar state, or that's a similar issue in another state, and this is how they've looked at it in terms of how it impacts those populations. So maybe we could glean something from that. So it may not be Maine specific, but you may be able to glean something from what they're doing in other regions. And then the questions are essentially the same, those 5 points, with some minor, not really substantive, but sort of changes for consistency with the preamble. So this is something that you approved the proposal from Dr. Dibble contingent on reviewing the language on these changes. So this is something that would require your action today to change or support as is.
Thank you, Director Fox. Should we move this forward and take a vote? Just need a motion to do so, to adopt the amended draft framework as Director Fox just articulated.
So moved.
Seconded.
So it's been moved and properly seconded. Any further discussion? Hearing none. All those in favor of the motion? Just say aye, maybe?
Aye.
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 Thank you. It is a unanimous vote, and they have been adopted. Thank you very much. So Director Fox, we would move into now looking at the specific proposed LDs.
Sure. So I might be a little bit repetitive here, but just to be thorough and in case anyone's joined in late, I will refresh the process for selecting these LDs, maybe a little more briefly than I did earlier. But during the course of your meetings, you as a subcommittee decided which committees you wanted to pick bills from. And those committees are Education and Cultural Affairs, Health and Human Services, Judiciary, and then Labor and Housing. And again, you stated that your goal was to have these statements in the possession of those committees for the selected bills within the sort of deadlines of committee voting. So that is why you decided to select from carryover bills, because we know that those are already drafted and referred, and there wouldn't be sort of procedural delays for new bills that have been introduced in the second regular session. So we're using from a pool of existing legislation. And then again, the Representative Talbot Ross and the University of Maine system and the Permanent Commission worked to identify bills based on the process that I described earlier. You know, this is their best guess in terms of capacity, and they believe that this is a reasonable number. They did, I think, want to express the caveat that they may not know until they get into it what limitations they may have, which hopefully the parameters, those 5 parameters in the preamble that you've amended will allow for something when they do run into barriers or lack of data. They may still be able to provide something on these bills if they can't find everything they need within the state. So again, so here are the bills, and I've provided if you have the document up on your screen, there is a hyperlink so you can see the text of those bills. Hopefully those work. I'm new to hyperlinking and was quite excited when I figured that I could do it successfully. So fingers crossed that they work for you. So the first is LD 270, and that's in the Education and Cultural Affairs Committee. I've just organized these alphabetically by committee. That's how I've decided to arrange it. And it's an act to amend the Regional Adjustment Index to ensure school districts do not receive less than the state average for teacher salaries. And then the second is in Health and Human Services. There are 3 bills from Health and Human Services. An act to provide children access to affordable health care. Also an act to ensure support for adults with intellectual disabilities or autism and high behavioral need. And an act to advance health equity, improve the well-being of all Maine people, and create a health trust. So those are the 3 in Health and Human Services. And just to reiterate, I think something that Representative Talbot Ross was talking about, I think, you know, when the deliberation was going back and forth about which bills, I mean, they did, it was quite a robust discussion and weighing, you know, certain bills, you know, one against the other, and, you know, trying to factor in all the criteria that they were looking at. The next, the bills from Judiciary, there are 3 here, but I think the understanding was that there would only be 2 from this committee, and Representative Talbot Ross has 2 from which I think between when I last spoke with you and today, you thought you'd be able to say which one of these you wanted to include in the pilot. So 598 versus 1068. And one is an act to prohibit discrimination in employment in school based on hair texture or hairstyle. Or the other is an act to restrict weapons pursuant to court order in cases of harassment. So I think based on the understanding with the University of Maine system and the Permanent Commission, we wouldn't do both of those, but Representative Talbot Ross was going to pick one. And I don't know if you've had the opportunity, Representative Talbot Ross, to decide which of those you want to move forward with in your proposal.
Yeah, I really wanted to talk with the subcommittee members about them and perhaps allow them to help us determine which bill makes sense to include. Part of thinking about the bills was, the other piece was to make sure that we were covering, a broad range of subject areas so that the legislature could learn, with particularly bills that may not on their face look like it has any kind of a racial impact. We really wanted to be able to just broaden the scope of topic areas and issues so that we could learn as much as we can, because again, this is a pilot. And so we want to learn it absolutely as much as we can. The other kind of consideration, I was really impressed with the level of understanding for the bills that the research team came with, and also what they were interested in looking at. So we have 598 and 598, an act to prohibit discrimination in employment in school based on hair texture or hairstyle, is commonly referred to across the country as the Crown Act. And it would provide us with an example of perhaps not necessarily what the level that this is taking place in Maine, but it would get us to the Maine Human Rights Commission to see what kind of data they may have on this type of discrimination. The other bill, 1068, is a bill that is really about protection from harassment orders, and it directs the defendant not to possess a firearm, family members, friend not to possess a firearm during the duration of the order. So I wanted to bring this to Speaker Fecteau and to Senator Daughtry and the other members of the subcommittee, just to see if there's any particular interest in weighing in on either one of these bills. It does unfortunately have to be one or the other for the capacity of the research team, but I don't know if you have any feedback or anything that you might want to lend to this discussion on either one of these bills. And then I just will make a decision and move on. So Speaker Fecteau or Senator Daughtry, any comments or any thoughts about either one of those two bills moving forward?
I think we both have our hands up, but I'll jump in.
Oh, great. I can't see.
Full disclosure, I would lean LD 598 because it's my bill. So,
Okay.
but also would like to see that connection with the Maine Human Rights Commission, because that was one of the things when I was asked by a couple of constituents to put it in with their own personal experiences, but we're wondering, what within existing law captures this, and how do we make sure we're, working within the parameters of a really strong Maine Human Rights Act, but also what do we have out there for data to show that this is something, it is part of a national movement, but also what does it mean for us here in Maine?
Thank you, Senator. Speaker Fecteau, and I apologize, I can't see the hands raised for some reason, but Speaker Fecteau?
No worries. Well, I'm gonna burst Senator Daughtry's bubble because I feel like that bill has a very obvious racial connection, and the significance to people of color is very clear to me. I mean, it's a bill about people of color and the impact that discrimination based on hair and texture has on them. And we know because we've seen this bill passed, a similar bill passed across the country, and advocates have made the case, I think, very clearly across the country about the importance of the bill. Whereas I don't think 1068 has that very clear and obvious connection to what the impact would be. And so I would lean towards 1068 based on the fact that I feel like 598, the racial impact is significant, is obvious and clear and significant. If we pass the bill, it will protect people who have hair that's different than mine from being discriminated against when they are anywhere but most especially when they're applying for a job or they're in a workplace. Whereas 1068, to me, it's like not clearly obvious what the racial impact would be of passing or not passing that bill.
Thank you. Yeah, I will admit that what you just articulated, Speaker Facto, is how I had also kind of seen it. I do think that 598 is a necessary bill. I'm grateful to Senator Daughtry for putting it in, and just wonder, Senator, if that resonates with you, that during the course of that bill being deliberated, we will get to a place where the known impact will need to be expressed. I mean, it's baked into the bill.
That's fine. I would agree with the speaker's points and argument, but it's like down and to the right when you're looking at your community's education funding. We always got to advocate for our own bills. But yeah,
That's right. Well, if it's truly okay, Senator Daughtry, then is it fair to say that there's consensus on moving 1068 into the pilot at this point, and we will take 598 out of the pilot? Is there consensus on that? Yep.
Yes.
Great. So, Director Fox, do you want to continue with the other two bills? I mean, the other bill in labor and housing?
Sure, it's just a matter of me reading the titles to sort of round things out.
Mhm.
But so the last two are an act to protect against discrimination of public entities, and that's in the Judiciary Committee. And then an act concerning non-disclosure agreements in employment, which is before the Labor and Housing Committee.
And I remember the conversation on 965, and just for Speaker Facto and Senator Daughtry's benefit, that was a bill in which I think the humane system said would be, one that they may or may not be able to come back and, have a fully formed opinion on it. So you should know that the combination of these bills are going to get us different, as Director Fox says, different levels of conclusions, because one of the things that the subcommittee did stress was important is that we wanted the pilot, the analysis, to actually produce a conclusion, a statement, similar to understanding the impact of a fiscal note. We wanted it to land somewhere. I will give just a tiny bit more voice to what Director Fox said about for us to remain somewhat nimble in this process, because again, this is a pathway we've never forged before, and they may get down the road into one of these bills and not be able to do much with it. So we are going to stay in good communication, and I just want to stress that nimbleness that they had asked for. If you both agree with that.
Yep, that makes sense.
Okay.
that sounds good.
So, Director Fox, is there any formal way of adopting these bills, or can we just, you have presented them?
I think it would make sense for there to be some formal action on this, and it sounds to me like it's a bit of an ought to pass as amended motion. So since you would be moving 598 out and maintaining 1068.
So moved with the change on including 1068, excluding 598.
So it's been moved
Seconded.
and properly seconded. Any further discussion? Not hearing any. All those in favor, just say aye.
Aye.
Sorry, aye.
Aye. So let the record reflect that that was a unanimous vote. Thank you both very much. We have our LDs. I'll turn it back over to Director Fox, and we can now go to agenda item 3, which is the development of a memo to the chairs of the 4 committees and guidance for report backs. Director Fox?
Thank you. So I think this is where the real meat of the work for you three today will come into play, and you'll have to be thinking about what you'd like. I don't have a lot to offer. I mean, maybe a little bit on the next item, but not so much on this item in terms of what you want to ask of the chairs, because the full committee is actually, probably would be involved in a report back to you. But within a certain number of days after the adjournment of the second regular session, the legislation that created this pilot asked for a report back from the committees that were selected to be part of the pilot. And I will say that the report back items in the statute, in the law that was passed, might not be so on point, given that you've contracted to have outside entities do this. So there may not be a lot to say in terms of the things that the legislation anticipated would be good report back information. So I think given that, you probably want to think about what is it that you want to hear from the committees in terms of the value of these statements, how they were used, so that before the report backs happen, the committees and the analysts who are likely assisting them will have an idea of what it is that you're looking for from them in terms of how they viewed these statements on the bills that were before their committees. So I have sort of an opening paragraph, which is pretty dry because it's just saying statute requires you to report back. And in addition to those things listed in the legislation, which again are not probably going to be super informative, and I'm happy to read you what those are, which is they are asked to report back on the number of pieces of legislation and the types of legislation for which statements were requested. That's something that you've already done in designing the pilot. The manner in which the statements were obtained or developed. I think that will be included in each of the statements themselves. The amount of time, both as an average and individually, needed to develop the statement. That's certainly something we can ask of the entities that you've contracted with, but I'm not sure that the committees will be that informed to provide that information. And then the cost, if any, to the Joint Standing Committee for obtaining them. And I think we've already determined what that will be, at least for the pilot. I mean, I think it's difficult to draft statute when you're developing a pilot and you don't know what the pilot's going to look like, but you're asking for a report back. So I do think as the subcommittee, you can, and the legislative council, frankly, have a little more flexibility to also ask for information that you think would be helpful from the committees about this process. So that's where I'm turning it over to you, and we can make a list of what it is that you would like to ask them to report back on.
Thank you, Director Fox. I have one item and ask for the speaker and Senator Daughtry to help me think this through. But I remember at one point in our discussions in the subcommittee, we almost kind of got ahead of ourselves because we were trying to think about at what point within the lifespan of a bill being debated would the statement come into play. And so it may be, it could be a good addition to what we ask the committees is to weigh in on that. At what point would the analysis, the racial impact statement analysis, be most impactful? Is it during the public hearing process? Is it during the bill writing? At what point in the journey would these analysis come into play? Does that make sense to you all?
Yes, if I can jump in, I would say it could potentially be handy during drafting, but the real crux of it, I think that's helpful in the work session. It comes right after, the public comment, and potentially may take in some of the public comment for committee members. But just thinking about, how I've operated in a committee, it would be right before the work session where it'd be the most beneficial.
Do you agree, Senator, that would be one of the pieces we should ask for in the report back, is to weigh in on the timeliness of the use of the analysis?
I think that would definitely, especially to hear from our colleagues and their own practice and experience, I think that'll be helpful. So, yeah.
Other things that we might want to put in this report, any other elements? One other thing, I just want to highlight the time piece, Director Fox, the amount of time. I think, we are fortunate that this pilot and it is not coming at a cost to the state legislature, but I do think that a real emphasis on the amount of time it takes to conduct this is going to be, it should be really emphasized, because that amount of time is going to allow us to know how much this might cost. I don't know how we go about a real cost, and trying to figure out how much this would cost to institutionalize racial impact statements in the legislative process, unless we understand how much time each one of these bills takes to go from start to finish. So I would like to have a real emphasis on time so that we can come up with some understanding of cost eventually.
Given that, no committee has too many bills. I mean, there's only, I think there's 3 is the most in any one committee. I mean, maybe you could ask for them to break it down by LD. Like, tell me the story of when did you get the statement? How did it advance the discussion? How was it used? Were there amendments based on it? Like, maybe we can find a way of generalizing it. So they talk about it on an LD level about how each one, rather than something more broad in general, which might be hard to capture in words. And then I think certainly we can reach out now to the University of Maine system and the Permanent Commission folks to ask them to keep track of time. And I think I know they are, based on, they do that anyway. They have various forms of funding sources. And so they allocate their time all the time to which grant funded this, or was this, in-house budget. They do that a lot. So I think that is something we can make clear, that they will report back to us at the end of the second regular session. I don't know that the committees will be able to talk about the time and development of the statement, but they can talk about how it impacted their consideration of a bill in their best estimation compared to if they didn't have it. So meaning, how much extra time does considering a racial impact statement take during the committee process? I don't know if that's what you're looking for, but that's certainly something that committees could report back on, rather than the time to develop the statement, because I don't think they'll have that information.
Sure, that makes perfect sense. Yeah. Any
Suzanne,
other? Yeah,
Suzanne,
please.
did you write that down? Because I said a lot, but okay. Thank you. Before you move on, I feel like I maybe put these in the wrong order, that it might have been helpful to think about what you want that's non-substantive to be in every racial impact statement. That might actually help you think about what you want the committees to report back on. And I'm sorry that didn't occur to me until now. But I thought, given that these things are new, I mean, probably there are members of the legislature that don't even know the subcommittee is occurring, and maybe members of those committees. So it's also going to be new to people that engage with the process or observe the process. So I thought each statement could have some consistent required elements that are not substantive, but that say this statement is being submitted pursuant to this law, which is the public law that created this subcommittee. Require that each statement talk about the parameters that governed the content, so that everyone knows we did have parameters. We weren't just going sort of willy-nilly picking what we wanted. We were tasked with answering these 5 questions to ensure that all sources are cited. And then which is a little tougher, explain the purpose of the statements, or maybe even a statement on how to use a racial impact statement. Like you could some sort of aspirational statement about what your hopes are in terms of how they influence deliberation in the committee on these LDs. So I don't know, maybe it would have made sense to talk about this first before talking about the letter, but now that we've said all of them, I guess we can, that maybe is helpful to you. And those ideas, those things that are required, I'm just throwing those out for discussion purposes. Those aren't a proposal. Those are for you to decide which ones you like or come up with others. Those were ones that just came to mind to me that I thought might be useful to include in a statement.
Well, thank you, Director Fox. It all blends together, so no apologies at all. I'm wondering if within the non-substantive elements, I know it says cite sources, but that I'm wondering if we also ask for some kind of understanding about the resources. So not the source of information, but resources that were either available or not. So just this general understanding about the resource, because I think it gets us to understand not just if we have data and what or not, but it also starts to build an understanding about the resources that we have in the state or a lack thereof. Does that make sense? I'm really interested in what resources, because beyond the actual analysis, there may be a way for the pilot to reveal the overall context in this state, or the resource capacity in this state to engage in this type of kind of process.
And in your mind, is that different from this, which is that sort of added?
No,
Is it
yeah, it is.
Okay.
It is. It's slightly different for me. I don't know about what Speaker Facto or Senator Dodge feel, but it is slightly different. And I'm going to go read it again. So yeah, limitations and barriers, absolutely. And then we added relevant regional or national trends. But the reason why it's different is because a barrier could be the resource or not, but it doesn't have to be that. I'd like for us to be more explicit. And maybe my colleagues don't agree, but I really would
My
love.
thinking when you're saying that is that maybe delves into the more, that maybe is substantive and maybe should be added to the parameters document rather than the non-substantive sort of uniform. The things what I was envisioning here, and you don't have to take any of this up, but I thought just to be, so because it's going to be new to people, they won't understand what this is. And so I was thinking adding uniform things to each one. So one, they'll know, oh, there's this many, they're all the, that was my thinking, so that it would be recognizable across committees for those bills that were chosen. So that's my read on that. But again, this is just my suggestion. So you go where you want to with it.
No, thank you. I agree. I just wonder if barriers will capture all of it, but I'm fine with leaving it the way that
We certainly could task the University of Maine system and the Permanent Commission with adding that in their report back to us.
Yes, maybe that's the appropriate place.
In addition to the time it took and the resources it took.
Yes, that is the appropriate place. Thank you. Yeah, thank you. Speaker Facto or Senator Daughtry, any additions to?
No, I would just say I liked Danielle's suggestion of having it put in there. I think that makes a lot more sense. And I'm just a reminder to all of ourselves that we can come back and tweak this based on how it goes. So
Perfect.
So the places, oh, I'm sorry.
No, I just said ditto.
So the places where I think input from you is still required is, again, we've got a little bit in the letter, which I think the committees might be looking for a bit more detail in terms of what you're expecting. And so I think there's probably a little more discussion that needs to happen on that. And then if you like these bullets in terms of the uniform things that would go on every racial impact statement, a little more discussion on the fourth one, which is the how to use the racial impact statement or explain the purpose or the aspirational goal, like the goal of this statement is to something like that provides some context with when they get this piece of paper, like what are we supposed to do with it? So they'll have the letter, but then everyone who didn't get the letter about how to do it will also be able to see that's what these are intended to do. And so I'll need input from you on that.
So
yeah, Speaker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, Danielle, are you saying that obviously there will be a letter to the chairs, and then this subsequent paragraph, this consideration of non-substantive elements required for racial impact statements, that will go out to all the committee members? Is that what you're thinking?
No, it would be printed on every statement.
Okay. Okay, gotcha. And are we thinking that maybe some of the elements in that below paragraph should be included in the letter? Is that what you're trying to?
No, not necessarily. I mean, I think they could be different things. I was thinking of something really broad and generic for the stuff below. So those, something consistent across all the statements. And then the letter is more, what do you want the committees to tell you in terms of how having these statements impacted their committee work, what they liked, what they didn't like, just to give them something so that the reports that you get back from the committees are also somewhat consistent, because you can envision that some committees may just decide, oh, let's tell them this. So that's why I think the letter is important, and that comparatively, I think it will be helpful to have at least them looking at the same things. I'm sure they'll all be unique and they'll all provide their own perspective, but if at least they're following the same framework, and that's and I think that is where you just find the framework. What do you want the committees to tell you?
Yeah. I guess, I like what's drafted so far for the letter and outlining, how we arrived at a place where their committee's been selected and what bills, the ... obviously the ellipses will continue, and you'll outline for each of these committee chairs what bills were selected in their individual committees. I don't know how specific we want to be with like what we expect them to provide us for feedback, because I also wouldn't want them to not give us feedback that they have, but doesn't fall into some box that we've created for them. And so maybe some kind of language like the subcommittee, would like for you to contemplate XYZ, probably some of the things that we've already talked about: timing, substance, whether or not the resources or sources of the information was helpful, or whatever kind of language you might use there. And then just say like, that these considerations are not limited to what's outlined. And if there are other things that you think would be informative for the future of this process, where this goes from being a pilot to a permanent element of the legislative process, please also include that in a communication to the subcommittee or wherever this ends up going. So yeah, I don't know if I captured all the elements that you suggested, Danielle, but I think something something like that would make sense to me in terms of communicating with the chairs. And obviously, if I would also invite them, if there's something that they're not clear about and they want clarity as they go through the process, they can send communication to the subcommittee of the Legislative Council, and we could try to put our minds together and answer their question or questions.
One specific question that I think falls into line with what you're saying that I think you could ask, and it might be an interesting, it's not really, we don't have enough for a data point, but it might be something you could do comparatively across, like did the information result in an amended version of the bill?
Yeah.
I think that's a kind of a yes or no question. So did it influence the creation of an amendment?
That's a great question.
Yeah, that's a good, or yeah, just general out. I mean, I might even go as far as saying the outcome of the bill. Did the committee overall vote yay or nay based on the statement itself?
Oh, that's actually a really, how in the other section where it says explain the purpose of the statements or give guidance on how to do the IRS, maybe prompt the committees to say whatever their position is on the bill, if the racial impact statement was part of their decision, whatever that decision is. That might be something. I don't know if you want that in the how to use this or in the letter, but that might be helpful too, if they could state it affirmatively. Because of this statement, I am proposing this amendment, or because of this statement, I am voting ought not to pass. Or
Yeah,
Right.
maybe worth putting that in both places.
okay,
Of course, one thing to think about is every committee is going to operate differently. So I do hope that we'll get like a good consensus of, or like a good census of the committee and not just what the chairs think, because the chair's perspectives is one thing, but having the entire committee polled basically to say yay or nay, did this impact having the RIS impact the way you determined your vote on this bill. I think it'd be helpful, but I don't think we need to formally tell committees that, but especially as we talk to our house chairs, we can definitely impress upon them getting a good census of what the entire committee thinks and not just what they think as chairs happened as a result of the impact statement.
Mhm.
I feel like we might have a good sense of the letter now. I'm feeling like I could round something up. Obviously, we'd draft it and send it to you for review. And obviously, if you just to offer my 2 cents, the analyst is going to be sort of also working with the chairs, I would imagine, to interpret what this letter means. And obviously, they have a resource in the office to say, if they are wondering themselves,
Mhm.
I certainly can help them in their work with the committees to develop their reports. I can provide
Excellent.
internal guidance, I suppose, is what I should be saying.
So that's excellent. Yeah, thank you very, very much. If you feel you have enough to draft that letter, Director Fox, then it leads us, and it's 11:03, so I want to check in with Speaker Fecto and Senator Daughtry. Then I think our meeting only goes to 11, right? We do have one other agenda item, the process for the subcommittee's reviewing of the report draft.
Before we move on, so I don't
Yeah.
feel like I have enough on the purpose of the statement. Can we want to just leave that off and let the letter speak for it?
I think so, but what do you think, Speaker Fecto, Senator Daughtry? I think there's enough.
I think there's more than enough there. And honestly, I feel like we're all policymakers and legislators, and saying this with a lot of love, a little nerdy to begin with. So I feel like if there's more information and feedback from the committees, they'll find a way to have that incorporated. So.
And the copy of the letter can be on hand in the committee, so we can make sure that the committee clerk has a copy of the letter. So if anyone wants to understand what that is, and we can certainly put it on the subcommittee's website too. So I
Nice.
think there'll be places for people to look at that don't understand what these things are all about. They'll be able to figure it out. Okay, sorry to interrupt you.
No.
I was just going to add, if it's all right, I think if people have questions, they're going to ask. I don't really think of the legislature or committees as a particularly quiet bunch. So I feel like I'll hear what everyone's thinking.
Yeah. So if we could take just another 2 minutes, we could complete the whole agenda. And that is, I think we're ready to move on, Director Fox, to our subcommittee's reviewing of the report draft. How is that?
Yeah,
please.
so the ideal for the last committee meeting before a report is drafted is that staff has enough to draft the report, and that we'll submit it to you for review. But essentially the review process, because that generally happens by email since we're not meeting in person, and even when we were meeting in person, that's generally how report reviews go. But you have to be mindful of not doing anything substantive or adding to what has already been decided in public. So I think you're probably all familiar with this process as you've reviewed reports before, but I think I want to be clear that that's the process moving forward. So we'll put forward a draft. You can certainly say you didn't capture this correctly, redo it, but there's no sort of new items unless the subcommittee decides to meet again in a public way. So, and then once the review process happens, and then the report will be made public. But that's generally what happens. And for this report, you've kind of seen the structure of it today, really. It's a very sort of summarized view. It will be, here's how the subcommittee was created. Here's what they did at their meetings. Here's what happened for work in between the third and fourth meeting. Here are the decisions that the council made. So, it seems like it's a fairly straightforward thing. I'll describe the information that you looked at. So when you looked at other states and the discussions that you've had. So I'll do that in basically a summary of each of the meetings and then conclude with where you ended up today.
That's perfect. Yeah, I think that makes good sense to me. Anyone see it differently? Oh, great. Well, I think we have our process, and I think we just a Herculean effort to try to take what was so large and really just in the ideal and bring it into some real structure and accountability is amazing to me. And I think it's a testament to Director Fox's work that she was able to take a vision and move it into reality, something very tangible for the legislature to take on in the second regular term. It's very exciting. I'm really just grateful that we'll all be on this journey together to learn what will have an impact. And that's the key word in racial impact statements, of its impact. So really excited about this journey that the whole state is getting ready to take next year. And thank you so very much, Director Fox. Thank you so very, very much, Ms. Gresser, and to my colleagues. Appreciate the time and the seriousness in which you participated in this subcommittee process. I think we can call for an adjournment and feel proud about the work that we've done. Any other comments, and we'll adjourn.
Thank you for the kind words. It was your vision. It really was your vision, and I hope that. But staff's role is to take that and to put it in something that's implementable and workable, and that is something that I hope you receive from all the analysts that provide work for you. But it's your vision, and we just find ways to make it work and implement your vision. So I've done this around the block a few times doing committee work. So that's how I view my role. But thank you for the kind words.
Absolutely. Speaker Facto, Senator Daughtry, we all set?
Yeah, I would just say thank you to Director Gresser, Director Fox, and thank you, Madam Chair. There was, I think, a good deal of work that happened when we were not in a Zoom box, and well, maybe it happened in a different Zoom box, but we were a part of. So I just want to say thank you for the time that you took to help make this process, help make what came to us at our subcommittee meetings possible, because I don't think it took someone from this subcommittee to do a little extra work, and that was you. And I just want to say thank you for taking that time and doing that.
Oh, much appreciation. Thank you.
I would absolutely echo everything that Speaker Facto just said, and really excited to see this pilot go forward and really see what comes out of it. So thank you for all of your hard work, Madam Chair, and as well as to both Director Gresser and Director Fox.
Yeah, well, it's onward, and it feels like we're excited to see what will come. So a move to adjourn?
So moved.
Second, and I would also just say Senator Daughtry looks to have like the most comfortable chair in the
Doesn't
world.
she?
I'm so jealous, isn't it?
It really is.
Fine. It's my best friend. She got it when she was teaching in Connecticut at the Habitat for Humanity sale for the Restore. I have no idea what kind it is, because everyone always asks if they can get one, but
It looks so big. I love
It does. Really comfy. Yeah. Well, thank you again, Director Fox and Director Gresser, my colleagues, and we will receive information and act on it accordingly. But for now, it's been moved and properly seconded. There's no discussion. All those in favor of adjournment? Great. Have a good rest of your day. Thank you all for all the hard work.
Thank you.